Hello. So the latest public position of Insulate Britain is staggering, but not really surprising at this point. Basically, they've come out and said, asked that people don't use the M25, that they just don't use the London Orbital, one of the world's busiest motorways. People just don't use it for them. Um, for their convenience, don't use it. They've asked the police not to arrest them, as if they can dictate that to law enforcement officers, and they, yeah, it's just absolutely staggering the arrogance these people have. Um, Quick recap if you don't know who Insulate Britain are. They're a group of, for now I'll call them activists. I think they are worse than that, but they call themselves activists. They call themselves protesters, and their whole issue is about fuel poverty in Britain and the need to insulate homes and issues around that. Now, the issues are valid. Those are areas that impact a lot of people. They're areas that are serious and need to be looked at. I've never said that their cause is trivial. I've never said that the issues they raise are trivial. What I and most of the country feel very strongly about is their methods are absolutely counterproductive, absolutely polarizing, and absolutely wrong. And even calling it methods almost downplays it. Let's be very clear what this lot are doing. They are deliberately blocking motorways and A roads. Ostensibly, they claim to put pressure on the government. Well, really, it's to threaten the government because they keep saying if the government doesn't do what we're demanding, then we will keep doing this. So it's threats. Let's be clear about it. It is threats towards the government. Now, people might say, well, that's fine, it's just the government. But what they're doing is they're choosing very knowingly to hurt the public. Extinction Rebellion, to some extent, used the same method. For example, when some of their breakaway activists got onto a London Overground train about 2 years ago, that infuriated a lot of people. Extinction Rebellion kind of distanced themselves from that. So, if it was possible, even Extinction Rebellion is a bit more aware of public sentiment. Even Extinction Rebellion never went this far. In fact, my understanding is Insulate Britain is a split away from Extinction Rebellion because they believe Extinction Rebellion is too moderate. Now, aside from the fact that what they're doing is illegal, so by definition they are criminals because they keep doing it. This isn't like, you get a minor driving offence and, well, that's an offence. Someone who repeatedly breaks the law, knows that they're breaking the law, I would say by definition is a criminal. And I would also endorse, frankly, what Dan Wooten and others in the media have designated this group as, which is basically domestic terrorists. But I say what they have designated them as actually the basis that they're using, because it shouldn't be something that's just thrown around. You can't just call someone you don't like a terrorist. But actually, what they are doing falls under the definition of the Terrorism Act of 2000, specifically their threats. Now, that is terrorism by definition. To make political threats, or rather to make threats for a political cause, and use aggressive methods to do so. I really, really think one of the main narratives that has to be challenged is that they're peaceful. And the basis for this is the fact that they're not throwing punches, they're not throwing Molotov cocktails at the police. So they think, well, I'm just being stationary, I'm not hitting anyone, I'm not planting bombs, therefore I am peaceful. But they're not, because deliberately hurting people is not peaceful. Deliberately causing profound stress is not peaceful. And actually, it's incredible that there hasn't so far been a bigger tragedy or a more widespread tragedy. So far, a woman has had a stroke. That's at least one we know of. There was an accident, whether it was directly related to the protests or not, we're not sure, to their action or not. I refuse to call it a protest. We're not sure, but we know at least one person is a direct casualty of this lot. Now, that woman who had a stroke was a direct consequence because her son was trying to get her to the hospital. They were in the vehicle for 6 hours. 6 hours. And that was directly in a tailback caused by Insulate bitten. So that can be directly blamed on them because had he got to the hospital earlier, the extent of her condition wouldn't have got that far. Um, I mean, it was hard listening to his testimony. He slowly watched her slipping away. That woman's life has completely changed as a direct result of these extremists. I believe her son should consider suing them um, for, I don't know what the charge would be, but surely there would be something. But the staggering arrogance these people have of making demands to the wider public is infuriating. I honestly think that interviewing them at this point really is a waste of time because they have an echo chamber. They make their little speeches that they're doing it for children, they're doing it for the future, and the rest of us should just listen to them. And they complain about being vilified, even though they do not have the ability to introspect and realize that they're being vilified entirely as a result of their own actions. And this is not a case of people who have a strong opinion about something and they're not being allowed an opinion and everyone else is hating on them for it. You know, there are parts of the world where simply having an opinion will get you in jail or get you into hot water. Although I would say that freedom of expression is not guaranteed in this country. I think increasingly we've seen it under threat, but perhaps that's for another video. But the point here is, I saw an obnoxious post on their page, their Facebook page, saying, I'm going to jail simply for believing in the future. This is the sort of euphemisms they use. So they sort of make it sound like an overbearing police state that doesn't let them protest. They are not going to jail for their opinions. They're not going to jail because they believe homes should be insulated. They're going to jail, if indeed many of them are, um, because they're breaking the law and because they're causing profound stress to a lot of people. I mean, how dare they think that they have a right to stop someone seeing a sick relative, to stop a mother getting her children to school? You know, that woman, Sherilyn Spade, I think I called her Sherilyn Shade before, it's Sherilyn Spade. Some people were mocking her Essex accent as if that's relevant. You know, they were sort of homing in on her. She was simply expressing what a lot of other people feel. Um, and I honestly think for their own good, there needs to be much tougher penalties because I think people can only be pushed too far. And I do think, unfortunately, there might be violence. I think motorists will really just snap. And I think there will be violence against them. And I don't want to see that. That's not good. It's not a good thing. It will be their own fault, but I don't think it's a good thing. I hope it's avoided. Um, I do think that a few things could happen. I think it's a disgrace how the police pandered to them. And I think that officer who went up and down the row of them, actually asking them if they needed anything, I think she needs to apologise. Because, over the last 2 years, the police have been very quick to enforce lockdown rules. Um, they've been very quick to jump on that, including one incident where a man in Sheffield was approached by officers on his own garden for supposedly flouting rules. Actually, what happened was the forces ended up apologizing because they realized it was overstepping the mark. They realized that he wasn't actually breaking the rules, and their officers went too far. So I think right now the police are doing themselves no favors. It's not good enough to say, well, they're in a pressurizing job, feel sorry for them. Yes, they are in a pressurizing job. Their pay isn't wonderful. But I don't think they're doing themselves any favors by what they're prioritizing. If you use the wrong pronoun online, there's a chance that you'll get a knock on the door for committing hate crime. But if you cause profound stress to thousands of people, I don't want to say inconvenience because I don't think that sums that up. If you hurt thousands of people, then you'll get kid gloves. You'll be negotiated with. You'll be asked if you're comfortable, even if you've been stupid enough to glue your own hands to tarmac. I think, frankly, if they were ripped off, it would cause damage in their hands. It might get them to learn a lesson, you know? It's their own fault. I don't know how they, like, if they have some sort of power tool that can get that off safely. Apparently, one idiot glued his head to the road in central London. I mean, I think that they see themselves as martyrs. And I think this is why they're so dangerous, because they are absolutely, utterly blinded by this self righteousness. They're not like regular criminals. You know, burglars go into a house because they're greedy, right? Um, a violent drunk assaults someone because he's in a bad mood at the time. Gangs attack people because they have no values. They have a depraved set of, well, they don't have values. Um, but what you get with eco extremists is a sort of strange middle class, almost chattering class type criminality. I mean, if you look at the demographics among them, often the retirees, some of them are younger, but a lot of them are older people. There's a number of clergy among them. I personally think that the Church of England need to seriously distance itself from those people. I think they need to be defrocked, personally. Um, they think that they're acting as good Christians by doing this for future generations. That's not good Christianity. Um, I think it's utterly contemptible. I mean, what we have here is a situation where you have a small minority of people. I mean, there's about 1,700 likes on their Facebook page. If that's an indicator of wider support, put that into context. 1,700 likes in a country of 67 million people. Now, Liam Norton and others have said they don't really care about public opinion. So they're being honest about that. They don't. Politicians and police cannot say that they don't know what their agenda is. They do. A growing number of backbenchers have been upping the rhetoric, rightly so. The police are working within their guidelines. So it would be unforgivable if legal bureaucracy stands in the way of action. I mean, there's all sorts of legal bureaucracy around. Well, it's been banned from the motorway, but it can only be a 24-hour period. And people are sick of this. People want to see action. People want to see these idiots dragged off the road. And, you know, a night in a cell is not a deterrent. I actually think when they go to prison, when they go to a prison cell, um, they sort of see themselves as like the suffragettes. Although I've mentioned this before, the suffragettes, the more militant faction of the suffragettes, also polarize public opinion. And one incident, I was reading about a list of suffragette incidents during particularly 1913. There was a very extensive campaign. In one incident, they planted bombs, and a group of Dundee postmen were seriously injured. So the suffragettes were essentially terrorists. I mean, there's no glossing it over. Militant hardline suffragettes were committing terrorist acts. They could have killed innocent people, but they had a noble cause. So simply having a noble cause, in my opinion, doesn't justify hurting innocent people. Some would say, well, the suffragettes had to do that. It was the only way that women got the vote. That, I think, is very dubious. I think that what eventually got women the vote was a few things. I think it was a change in demographics of World War One, because what you had was women were taking jobs that men traditionally done on the home front, and they showed that they could do them just as well. That was a very important thing, the changing social demographic, and also the tireless work of more moderate suffragettes who did not get the wider public to hate them. You know, when they planted bombs, all that done was anger the wider public, much like what Insulate Britain is doing today is just angering the wider public. And I do not believe that 20 or 30 years from now, when we have more floods and rising sea levels, people will look back and say, well, they were prophets. They were right all along. I don't believe that because we're not in a period where people are ignorant about the issues. You know, people are not kind of living blindly and thinking, oh, well, there's no issues. We could just continue as life as normal. I think that actually awareness of climate change issues and green issues in general have developed a lot more in recent years. I think the UK We're not perfect, but I think we've done a lot more than eco zealots give us credit for. Um, so this is not a case that they're the ones who are enlightened and they need to wake the rest of us up. I really don't believe that is the case. I don't think people will look back and say, well, they were right all along. And I think if that was to be the case, it would be the wrong assessment. Because even if there are more floods, even if there are, we really, really do suffer those consequences, which is a possibility. Um, Someone gluing themselves to the M25 and stopping an ambulance, in the case of the incident at Purfleet, getting to a children's hospital, I don't think people will look back and say, well, that was morally justified. You know, uh, to stop one critical situation from and ostensibly to prevent another. That's a crazy logic. That is a crazy logic. That's a bit like saying, I'm going to commit arson to prevent burglary. You cannot commit extreme acts and say it's for the wider public good. That's just nonsensical. And I think it's galvanized other groups. Apparently, there was a meat free group scaled a home office today or a home office building in London. What you have here is a dangerous situation where people think that the right to protest means they could do what they please. And it isn't just eco extremists. You get the anti vax crowd. I mean, the things they've been doing is despicable. Gathering outside schools, intimidating people. Um, Look, a lot of people have strong views on a lot of issues. I've got strong views on justice. I believe that our justice system is largely unaccountable and it deeply frustrates me. And I want to see changes. But I've said this before. If I was to glue myself to a court building, if I was to physically harass or threaten judges, if I was to stop a trial taking place, well, firstly, I'd be held in contempt of court. But secondly, it wouldn't win public support to my cause. They might say, well, this guy's right to be frustrated, but the tactics are wrong. So, a lot of people feel strongly about a lot of things. Are Insulate Britain so arrogant that they think they are the only people who have strong views on things? Um, but I think they're worse than Extinction Rebellion because even Extinction Rebellion had the good sense to not do this. They've done some stupid things. I still think they're a bit of a nutty organization. I don't like Extinction Rebellion, and I don't like all their tactics. I don't see how vandalizing buildings help the cause, but they never done this. Insulate Britain are extremists. I really believe they need to be prescribed as a group. I might start a petition to that end, asking the government to get them prescribed because they are an extremist group. And some people say, I've seen this obnoxious analogy. First, they came from the socialists, and I said nothing because I was not a socialist. Then they came from the trade unionists, and I said nothing because I was not a trade unionist. So you see where this is going. People who make that analogy are comparing it to the Third Reich. They're saying that we have to allow all kinds of protests, otherwise, we would be a police state. But the fact of the matter is, these groups have very, very, very small public support. The anti-vax crowd probably have more support than Insulate Britain, but for the most part, they're fringe groups. They do not have mainstream support. And I insist that Insulate Britain is not peaceful. I believe that deliberately causing harm is an aggressive act. It might not be a violent act, but it's an aggressive and harmful act. Thereby, it is not peaceful. So, they piss me off, and I'm not even a motorist. So I can only imagine the stress and anger that they're causing people who have no choice but to commute. Um, I mean, just telling people to not use the M25, it's ludicrous. Has it occurred to their arrogant way of thinking that some people simply have no choice? If you live in the home counties and you need to get into central London, what other way is there but to use the M25 or at least to go through it? At some point, it's the London orbital, you can't avoid it. Um, I feel disgusted by them, quite honestly. But I think they cannot be reasoned with. There's no point trying to negotiate with them. There's no point trying to get them to introspect. They're extremists. You cannot reason with the mind of an extremist. because they've convinced themselves they're absolutely right. They're martyrs. The rest of us are idiots. The rest of us are wrong. So they're going to do what they're going to do, right? You can't negotiate with them. So focus then should turn on legislators and the police. The police have to be a lot more robust in tackling them. It's a disgrace that they take too long to show up. That could be because of cuts to police, but I think actually, I hate to be cynical, but I do think sometimes the police don't get the priorities right. But legislators as well. I think there should be a temporary law passed that no motorists will be fined or prosecuted if one of these idiots comes to harm. I think there should be much tougher penalties. 2 years in prison, I think, is about right. I think freeze their financial assets. If they're working, freeze their bank account. If they're retirees, freeze their pensions. This might sound harsh, but there has to be harsh measures because so far the leniency just hasn't worked. They're continuing to make their threats. They're continuing to hurt ordinary people. So unfortunately, the consequences have to escalate. Um, 2 years in prison, freeze their assets. Um, I think that definitely taking down your social media accounts on the grounds that that page is promoting criminal acts. Surely that violates community guidelines. I think there's more that can be done. Um, if the police have information that they're going to be at a particular road at a particular time, the police should be there on the spot waiting for them. They shouldn't even be able to get onto the road. It shouldn't be a case of they get onto the road, they glue themselves down, then the police negotiate with them to move. They shouldn't be even allowed onto the road. One person I know proposed citizens arrest. Bring bring plastic uh, forget the term that was used, but yeah, that might actually be a possibility. Don't use violence against them, don't punch them. I think it would be very understandable, but yeah, people could get themselves into legal trouble if they done that. So, citizen's arrest. Simply say, I am arresting you as a citizen's arrest because you're breaking the law and you're doing this. Arrest them. I think that's very legitimate. The tactic is to kind of fall limp when people drag them off. So if their hands are behind their back and they're tied up, it'll be harder to do that. One guy had a creative approach of using their own banner to tie them up so they couldn't physically get onto the road again. But the truth is this, they really have achieved something which is nothing to be proud of. And if I were them, I would be uncomfortable about it. They have achieved a situation where the wider public have actually started to hate them. I mean, I don't take any pleasure from that, but when you push people and push people and push people, at some point, you know, the good reason that the British people have is going to erode, and people are simply going to hate them. And unfortunately, that might lead to violence. I really don't want to see that happening. You know, I've got contempt for them, but I don't, doesn't mean I want them to, necessarily suffer. I do think they should face consequences legally. But people are just fed up. They see a small group of extremists holding the country to ransom, and they see a situation where not much is changing. The police really aren't doing enough. Legislators are talking tough, but there's still limits on what can be done. This is a disgrace. You cannot, in a democracy, have a small group of extremists holding the majority to ransom. And they love to talk about freedom and the right to protest. There's also responsibility to other people. I mean, I didn't even think I'd still be talking about this. I thought when I made that initial video, I didn't think this would be going on. But why is this still happening? Why are they still getting onto the roads? It's crazy. They need to be prescribed. I think, yeah, I think what I've said. I'll just repeat myself now, but that's my thoughts. Insulate Britain activists, if you happen to be watching this, try and learn something. Try and have some introspection. Try and have some humility. Do yourselves a favor. Stop this nonsense. Um, and stop making people hate you. It's that simple.